Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive Hobbycast. I hope you are doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today on the Hobbycast, we are going to be reviewing 31 horror movies. All of the movies that I watched in the month of October in the year 2022. These are going to be pretty quick reviews, some only a couple sentences, some a little longer. I don't want to make this podcast like 8 hours long. But yeah, some capsule reviews. So I wanted to watch 31 movies this year, do that 31 movie challenge, and I did it. And these are going to be pretty much in the order that I watched them, except for the last five. The last five is kind of a top five of the month. And so those are going to be in number order. But anyhow, let's get on with it. Let's start. So here we go. Number one here, I'm not going to count them each time, but you can keep track if you want to make sure I actually reviewed 31 movies. But we have Dead of Night from 1945. And this is an anthology with segments directed by Alberto Cavalcanti, Charles Crichton, Basil Dearden, and Robert Hammer. And this is an early anthology with a pretty good framing device. I like a good framing device in my anthology movies. It's not exactly scary, but it's a little spooky. Maybe on par with something like The Twilight Zone. It's got a really good campfire vibe to it. It has good acting and writing, and three segments in particular. One called The Christmas Party, one called The Haunted Mirror, and one called The Ventriloquist Dummy are quite good. Ventriloquist dummies always scare me. I still remember that episode of The Twilight Zone with the ventriloquist dummy, and that still haunts me. So this is a good classic movie, and it comes recommended. I'm going to do a kind of a 4-tier recommendation system. I'm going to do a not recommended, a tepid recommendation, recommended, and highly recommended. Okay, so next up is The Undead from 1957, directed by Roger Corman. This one got the Mystery Science Theater 3000 treatment at one point. I think this movie has a really cool setup. A psychologist puts a prostitute under a new kind of hypnosis, and she regresses back in time to a past life where she is a witch. And then they have to try to figure out how to get her unstuck in time. The best things about this movie are some of the fantasy and magical elements I was not expecting. I think those were pretty cool. But overall, the movie is really bland. Just zero excitement, zero chills, no thrills, nothing really at all to recommend. So The Undead comes not recommended. All right, next up is Return to Salem's Lot, 1987, Larry Cohen. I am not a fan of Larry Cohen's movies at all. I kind of like Q the Winged Serpent, but that is it. Every single other movie I've seen from him is just not good, and or not for me. I don't like it. And Return to Salem's Lot continues that trend. Just a dreadful movie. It's got some of the most sad sack, angry, unlikable characters I've ever seen in a movie. Everyone seems so pissed off all the time. And the leader of this group of jerks is actor Michael Moriarty, who plays Joe Weber, and he turns in a truly no F's given performance. I mean, this guy is so dour, so angry, and it's kind of fun to watch him. His on-screen son is played by Ricky Addison Reed, and he's really something else, just a total major brat. This is a really hard movie to watch, and it is not recommended. Coming up next is The Satanic Rites of Dracula from 1973, directed by Alan Gibson. And this is a Hammer horror film. Hammer horror is a pretty big blind spot in my watching habits, so I've been trying to rectify that over the last couple of years. I've been watching more, and I loved this one. It is so 70s and kind of sexy, and I like that. It has Dracula as a CEO of a corporation, which is a front for a satanic cult trying to usher in a new plague. That is a fantastic setup. It's got biker gang cults riding around with barbarian vests and lots of nudity. It's super cheesy, super sexy, and a lot of fun. And of course, it has Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. The Satanic Rites of Dracula comes highly recommended. Okay, next up is The Dead Zone from 1983 from director David Cronenberg. I recently read the novel, so I decided to watch the movie. And like the novel, the movie is merely okay. It's got a great performance by Christopher Walken as a psychic, and I love the chilly autumn into winter vibe, a perfect fall movie. But the movie never really gets tense and never really builds up to any real suspense. It also totally changes one of the best sequences in the book, and in doing so, it completely changes one of the best characters. I don't want to give too much away, but in the book, there's a scene, a whole sequence where Johnny Smith, Christopher Walken's character, is tutoring a kid, and he gets a premonition of the kid's class being trapped in a fire. And they changed that in the movie, and they also changed the kid's dad quite a bit, make him more of a jerk. And I did not like that change at all. And I'm not sure why they felt the need to change it. Maybe the fire would be too much. Maybe it was too big of a budget. The film and the book, I think, both fail to truly depict the horror that Johnny Smith is trying to prevent. And the political angle in both is brought in far too late to really feel impactful. So unfortunately, I'm going to give The Dead Zone a not recommended. Okay, coming up next is The Day of the Beast from 1995, and this is directed by Alex de la Iglesia, who some people might know from his series 30 Coins. And man, what a discovery. Wow. This is the only movie that I know of that gets close to capturing the tone of American Werewolf in London. This is a pitch black comedy about the end of the world with an ending that completely delivers on its premise. It's about a priest, a satanic metal fan, and a TV psychic trying to prevent the coming of Satan and the apocalypse. It's pretty wild. It spins its wheels a bit in the second act, but the first and final acts are really something else, and it has an absolutely brilliant opening scene and sequence. The Day of the Beast comes highly, highly recommended. This was a great discovery for me. Almost made it into my top 5. Okay, next up is another anthology, and that is The House That Dripped Blood from 1979, directed by Peter Duffel, and this is from another British production house called Amicus. This has a framing device where some detectives are reviewing evidence of strange happenings at a cursed house. And each case file is a story in the movie. And like I said before, I like a good framing device in a horror anthology. So this has great sets and lighting and has that really nice late 60s, early 70s kind of surreal quality to it. The stories revolve around a writer wanting to write a new thriller and horror movie actors living in the house. A few of the segments were actually adapted from old Weird Tales stories, so that's super cool. It has Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, and the absolutely beautiful Ingrid Pitt in it. It's a solid, low-key movie for a gloomy Sunday afternoon, and The House That Dripped Blood is recommended. Okay, next up is The Incredible Melting Man from 1973, directed by William Sachs. This is a terrible movie with some cool effects from a young Rick Baker. It's about an astronaut exposed to space radiation, turning him into the Incredible Melting Man, a zombie-like beast who slowly roams the countryside, killing victims to absorb their flesh. It has some of the dumbest characters ever, and one of the most uncomfortable scenes of horror nudity I've ever seen, where this cameraman basically rips off a girl's top so he can photograph her nude. It's really nasty. But the only thing worth watching the movie for are the gooey gore effects. And they're pretty good, and they're very, very gooey. The Incredible Melting Man, not recommended. And coming up next is probably my biggest disappointment of the season, and that is Hellraiser 2022 from David Bruckner, who I really enjoyed his movie The Ritual. Yeah, this was the worst movie I watched this month. I couldn't even finish it. I was totally stoked for a new take on the Hell Priest, aka Pinhead. Having a more feminine take would move the character back more in line with the original book. I was totally down with that. But the movie is just straight up garbage. It's so dark and murky that I couldn't even see over half the movie. There's this trend these days with digital filming where, because they can film more things in the dark, more filmmakers are filming things in the dark, and I can't see them. I had the brightness turned up, I had the contrast, adjusted, I had the gamma adjusted. The movie that has some of the worst lighting I have ever seen. The characters are dumb and idiotic. The plot is dumb, and it's really not creepy at all, at least from what I saw. I actually turned it off before Pinhead even showed up because it was completely wasting my time. So Hellraiser 2022, not recommended. Next up is Escape Room 2019 from director Adam Robitel. I liked this up until the end when they tried to turn it into a new Saw franchise by introducing a villain with a purpose. The premise is fun. It's basically Saw meets Cube. It's generally well written and acted, and some of the traps and puzzles are super devilish. So basically, this is a movie where a group of characters who all have something in common get invited to a deadly escape room, where if they don't escape the rooms, they die. I find that trying to put myself in these characters' shoes in these kinds of movies makes me really uncomfortable. And it makes me like the movies more, like Saw. I don't think the Saw movies are great, but when I really try to think, okay, what would I do in that situation? That fills me with terror in these kinds of being trapped. I am so afraid of being trapped in places and not being able to escape. And we're going to touch on that much, much later. But yeah, Escape Room, actually a tepid recommendation. Okay, coming up next is Deadstream from 2022. Directed by Vanessa Winter and Joseph Winter, and starring Joseph Winter. Deadstream, it's a play on Livestream. This is a super awesome movie. I loved it. It's a found footage movie, but one of the best I've seen. It's about a canceled, failing influencer named Sean, and he live streams his stay in a haunted house for views and subscribers. And the real key moment, the real standout thing about this movie is the constant flow of on-stream chat that Sean is interacting with throughout the movie. Super creative use of modern technology and a very limited budget. One of the better found footage style films I've seen, and Deadstream comes highly, highly recommended. Okay, next up is, I think, my first rewatch, and that is Uzumaki from 2000. Directed by Hukuchinsky, a Ukrainian-born Japanese director. So yes, this was a rewatch. I owned this movie on VCD. I got it when it was new. I was kind of disappointed in it, but I've been wanting to rewatch it, and I'm really glad I did. I liked it a lot this time. This is, of course, based on the works by Junji Ito, one of Japan's premier horror manga artists. It's kind of an anthology about a rural town in Japan being overtaken by strange spirals that make people turn into snails and do bizarre and violent things. Got a great look, lots of gross, slimy sounds, and tons of cool little hidden spirals all over the place. The imagery and tone make this one a recommendation. Next up is The Autopsy of Jane Doe from 2016 by Andre Uvredel. I've never seen a movie that started with such a strong first half and ended with such a terrible second half. I thought the reigning kings of this phenomena were Event Horizon and Sunshine, but I love the premise in the first half of this movie. The mystery, the discovery, and the tension are great. And then it turns into a stupid mess of just kind of like these supernatural powers. They introduce this really strong supernatural vibe, and I think it kind of kills the movie. It's got Brian Cox in it, who is always great, and a very brave performance by Olwen Kelly. She plays the corpse of Jane Doe, and her entire performance consists of laying naked on a cold medical table. And I'm not being facetious here. I truly believe this is a brave bit of physical acting. She's completely naked the entire movie and just lays on this cold metal table. I don't know, it must have been heated or something. It must have, I don't know. I'm not sure how she wasn't self-conscious the entire time. Just, wow, I mean, I thought it was a dummy. There's no way that, no, it wasn't. It was for the most part, it was a real actress, Elwyn Kelly. Very, very cool performance. But unfortunately, I don't think the movie is recommended. All right, next up is Mad God from 2021, director Phil Tippett. So Phil Tippett, one of the great minds of old school Hollywood special effects and stop motion animation. This is a stop motion animated movie overflowing with creative, horrific, and fantastic imagery. However, if you go in expecting a cohesive narrative, you will be disappointed. This is a tone piece. It's an art film. It's a display of Tippett's great work behind the camera and his work in front of the camera with his stop motion animation. It's basically a collection of vignettes showcasing Tippett's artistry. Mad God comes recommended for a certain crowd. If you like Eraserhead, you will probably like something like Mad God. Okay, next up is a movie called Curse of the Demon from 1957, and that was directed by Jacques Tourneur, and this was also known as Night of the Demon. I watched the edited version, which was Curse of the Demon. The full version is coming. I liked the movie enough to buy it on Blu-ray, and I ended up finding a copy of the unedited Night of the Demon. This is a very cool older movie about a satanic cult and a demonic monster. It has some really killer effects for an older movie. The demon thing looks great, kind of straight out of a Godzilla movie. It's based on an M.R. James story, so you know the plot is going to be good. This one was actually recommended by a Dungeon Dive viewer, and I'm really thankful for it. It's a little slow and not especially scary, but it has good atmosphere, good acting, and a fantastic finale. So Curse of the Demon, recommended. Next up is another rewatch, and that is Cat's Eye from 1985, directed by Louis Teague. Between this and Creepshow, I wish Stephen King was involved in more anthologies. His short stories are where King really shines as a literary author and a great author of hard-hitting horror, and I would love to see more anthologies based on his short stories. Cat's Eye is a great movie. It has the best cat actor I've ever seen. It contains two great classic King short stories, Quitters Inc. and The Ledge, and an original story called General. It's very 80s. It almost has a made-for-TV quality to it, but I love horror anthologies, and this is a perfect example of why. These stories all work perfectly as short, bite-sized pieces. So Cat's Eye, highly recommended. All right, next up is The Haunted Palace from 1963 from director Roger Corman. This one was recommended to me by an old friend, so thank you, Braden. This is a weird one. The poster says it's Edgar Allan Poe, The Haunted Palace, but it's actually based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft and includes the Necronomicon, Charles Dexter Ward, and it's set in Arkham. So it's basically Edgar Allan Poe's The Haunted Palace based on stories by H.P. Lovecraft. And I guess that doesn't necessarily roll off the tongue, but this is a great movie. It stars Vincent Price, and he's amazing. Deborah Paget is stunning. It's cool to hear Lovecraft's creations being talked about in the old movies. At one point, they actually say Yog-Sothoth. It's a little slow, not exactly thrilling, but still recommended. Next up was another recommendation from Braden, and that was Glorious from 2022, directed by Rebecca McKendry. This is a perfect example of a movie that should have been a 30-minute segment in an anthology. You know, how about a horror anthology set around a rest stop bathroom? That would be amazing. But as a feature-length movie, it fails to stay interesting. A lot of that has to do with the main actor, Brian Quentin, who is really the only actor on screen for about 98% of the movie, and he's just not good. J.K. Simmons plays the voice of a demon elder god, but even that's not great. And the premise, I forgot the premise. It's about a man who discovers an elder god through a glory hole in a rest stop bathroom. But that premise kept me away. It just sounded like it was trying too hard to be edgy, and it's really not. But unfortunately for me, Glorious is not recommended. Okay, coming up next is Summer of '84 from 2018. This one was directed by 3 people, and I'm going to butcher all 3 of their names. Francois Samard, Anouk Wissel, and Jan Carl Wissel. Okay, I'm sorry, I apologize. But I'm not sure why it took 3 directors to make this. I did enjoy it, but I didn't love it. It has a super dark ending that I was not expecting, so kudos for that. Total points for sticking to that ending. It was a complete surprise. This is a total 80s kids on bikes throwback, and the pastiche works for the most part. I'm glad that it never goes supernatural, but I was never fully engaged. There are some good performances from some of the kids and a cool little romance subplot that actually has some heart. So the Summer of '84 comes with a tepid recommendation. All right, next up is Mayhem from 2017, directed by Joe Lynch. Mayhem, a deadly virus enters a high-rise office complex, turning all of the workers into violent, sex-crazed maniacs. I expected more violence and gore. A lot of the really twisted stuff happens off-camera, and I'm pretty sure that was because of the budget. This is a fun movie. It's a lot like a video game. The 2 heroes team up and have to reach the penthouse floor in a certain amount of time. There are even key cards to gather and bosses to overcome. It stars Steven Yeun, who was Glenn from Walking Dead, and the amazing Samara Weaving. I love Samara Weaving. She is so much fun to watch. I want her in more action comedy horror movies because she is just not afraid to really go for it and just get up in there and have fun. She's fantastic in the movie Ready or Not. And Ready or Not is also a much better film, but Mayhem comes with a tepid recommendation. Next up is Antlers from 2021, and that is from director Scott Hooper. This is another take on the Wendigo legend, a spirit of consumption that possesses the hungry. My favorite Wendigo movie is the absolute masterpiece Ravenous. Ravenous takes a more black comedy tone, and the Wendigo is more of an idea. Antlers is super dark and depressing, and the Wendigo is a straight-up monstrous beast. The beast looks great. It looks like the beast from The Ritual, the movie I mentioned earlier. And the film has a really dark and wet, depressing tone that seems to be so popular these days. Overall, the movie is okay. I'm glad it didn't go down the repressed childhood trauma angle I thought it was going to. It really did commit to its monster premise. And because of that, I give it a tepid recommendation. Okay, next up is a rewatch, and that is Dagon from 2001, directed by Stuart Gordon. So I've seen this movie 3 times, and every time I swear that Jeffrey Combs is in it. And I'm always surprised that he's not. I don't know if the main actor just has like it's like you order Jeffrey Combs from wish.com and you get this guy. Hopefully I remember that next time. I'm also not sure why this is called Dagon and not Shadows over Innsmouth. Making this movie must have been a real drag. There is so much rain and water in this movie. Good God. Everyone is like soaked the entire movie. It's pretty slow up until that last 20 minutes or so, but the finale, the final 20 minutes is incredible. I love it. And because of that, Dagon comes recommended. Okay, next up is Terrified from 2017 from Demian Rugna from Argentina. Not a haunted house movie, but a haunted street movie. I saw this come recommended on AMC's 101 Scariest Horror Moments series, and it looked really scary. Unfortunately, it looked a lot scarier than it was, but it was still pretty good. It's not bad, it was really oversold by the hosts on that show. It's about a team of parapsychologists investigating strange occurrences on a small suburban street. It has a couple of very good sequences, including one where a dead child comes back to his house after his funeral. It's long and filled with great tension. Terrified does come recommended. Okay, next up is another recommendation from my old friend Russ, and that is The Vagrant from 1992. And that is directed by Chris Wallace. This is an odd little horror comedy starring Bill Paxton. Perhaps part of the yuppie nightmare subgenre, Paxton plays an up-and-coming businessman moving up the corporate ladder, just able to purchase his first home. Turns out there's a vagrant squatting nearby, a vagrant who has been using the house before Paxton bought it. The horror elements start off slow, but they ramp up to an almost cartoonish level. It reminded me a bit of House 1 with an uninvited guest vibe. I've never heard of this one before, so I thank my buddy Russ for recommending it to me. It comes recommended if you're looking for something odd and really under the radar. Okay, next up is Dark Night of the Scarecrow from 1981, directed by Frank De Felitta. This was a made-for-television movie that is surprisingly good. Super low budget. It was made for CBS, and it actually kind of feels like a logical extension of the CBS Radio Mystery Hour, just with visuals. It's about a group of bigoted jerk rednecks who kill a mentally challenged man after accusing him falsely of killing a young girl. The group of rednecks gets picked off one by one by a strange force, and before they are killed, each one is visited by a scarecrow. It's a pretty decent little movie. It's super low key, but surprisingly effective, and that comes recommended. Okay, next up, I have to insert one. So you're actually going to get 32 movies because I completely forgot about one of the earlier anthologies I watched, and a really good one. I forgot to include it on my list, and that is from 2015, and that is Southbound. And this has segments directed by Radio Silence, Roxanne Benjamin, and David Bruckner, who we have already mentioned. And also Patrick Horvath. So this is a really cool anthology set in the American Southwest. Got a very cool framing device, and it has a couple of absolutely incredible segments. My favorite one is actually directed by David Bruckner, and that is The Accident. What an amazing sequence here. So good. It has a real Thomas Ligotti feel to it. It's about a man who hits a girl out on this highway with his car, and he has to like scoop up her broken body and take it to a hospital. And then when he gets to the hospital, all kinds of horror, crazy things happen to him at this hospital. And very mysterious, very eerie, just kind of like this dark, quiet kind of not corporate vibe, but industrial vibe to it. And that's why it makes me feel like Thomas Ligotti. I absolutely loved this segment, and I liked most of the other segments. So Southbound does come highly recommended. And then finally, the last movie before we get into my top 5, I left this one out of my top 5 because it's my favorite movie of all time, and that is Poltergeist from 1982, directed by Tobe Hooper / Steven Spielberg. I watch this movie every year. I've already talked about it in my last podcast about my top 10 horror movies. I just reviewed the novelization on my new book channel, All Fiction is Fantasy. And I love Poltergeist. It's so good. It never fails to amaze me about just how good the movie is, how well it's made. The score is fantastic. It's got a great vibe. It's super spooky. It's well acted. And I love Poltergeist. I can't say, I can't say enough good things about Poltergeist. For me, it is a perfect movie. But now let's get into my top 5 viewings. These are all brand new to me, and these are the top 5 movies that I watched this month that I absolutely loved. And coming in at number 5, and this was actually the last movie I watched this month, a huge surprise, and that is Fall from 2022, directed by Scott Mann. This movie reminded me of one of my favorite all-time movies, and that is Revenge. But not in terms of plot, but how it just came out of nowhere and completely knocked my socks off. This is from the same producers as 47 Meters Down, only this time they don't ask, what if we send 2 girls down really deep underwater? And instead they ask, what if we send 2 girls really high up into the sky? This movie is all about 2 extreme sports chicks who climb a 2,000-foot rusted old radio tower in the middle of nowhere. And then when an exterior ladder breaks, they get stuck at the very, very top on this 4-foot platform. I hate being stuck in places. And I even not just claustrophobia, but if I'm somewhere and I can't leave on my own accord, if I can't choose to get up and leave, I hate that. And my God, this movie filled me with so much tension. The suspense for me was almost unbearable. It was made with a minuscule budget of $3 million. It's a fantastic work of survival horror. It has a killer little twist towards the end. And man, The Fall, I love this movie. It's totally ridiculous, totally stupid, but totally amazing. Highly recommended. Actually, all of these top 5 come highly recommended. The next up, number 4, is Censor from 2021, directed by Prano Bailey Bond. And this is for all of you fans of the video nasties out there. So in the UK in the 1980s, during the boom of the home video craze, a huge number of horror and exploitation films were either highly censored or straight up banned by this government board. People ended up calling these the video nasties. These were the films to avoid, according to the UK government. But what actually happened is that fans used this list as a roadmap of what to discover. The government inadvertently made a list of, hey, these are all the movies you guys should be watching. And through illegal tape trading and importing, people would track these films down. And so they gained legendary status. This movie uses that as a backdrop for a bizarre trip into a psychological nightmare of one of the women whose job it is to review these depraved movies, one after another, over and over again, to determine what can be approved and what needs to be cut. It's very slow, unnerving, and very well made. Okay, number 3 is One Cut of the Dead from 2017, directed by Shinichiro Ueda. This is a Japanese movie. Even though I knew there was a twist, nothing could have prepared me for what this movie actually is about. I'm going to say very little about this, just to protect those of you who haven't seen it. The less you know, the better. I will say 3 things. 1, if you're not liking it, keep watching until after 40 minutes. 2, you might cry tears of joy. 3, it is insanely good. Okay, number 2 is Happy Death Day to You. Hey, I put number 2 with a 2. All right, so this is from 2019. Director Christopher Landon. I'm a huge fan of Blumhouse, and I think the Death Day movies are some of their best. They are so charming and so much fun. The first basically asks, what if Groundhog's Day was a slasher film? It stars Jessica Roth as Teresa, or Tree, as she's known to her friends. She's a total basic B college chick who gets stuck in a time loop and is brutally murdered every day, only to wake up on the same morning over and over again. The best thing about the movie is Tree's progression as a character. She is such a fun lead, one of the best lead female characters in any horror movie, and Jessica Roth's performance is so good. Part 2 kind of asks, what if Back to the Future was a slasher film? Kind of. It at least takes a more sci-fi angle to the premise. And once again, the best part is the progression of Tree's character. These are horror films with real heart. And the best sequence in the movie is the suicide montage in which Tree kills herself over and over again as she is trying to solve her time loop predicament. Yes, Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day 2U are brilliant movies. And number one should come as no surprise to fans of horror, and that is Barbarian from 2022, directed by Zach Kreger. Barbarian is all the talk of the town, and rightly so. Barbarian is an unequivocal masterpiece of primal horror. Slate called it a work of unelevated horror. And while that's true, I also think it has like a dozen layers of subtext working below the surface. The name Barbarian alone could inspire an entire book's worth of writing. There is so much to this movie. However, even if you completely ignore the subtext, it still works as a perfectly executed work of terrifying dread, horror, and suspense. Additionally, it's not afraid to get really stupid and ridiculous, and it does so on purpose. Barbarian is like the best of Joe R. Lansdale meets the best of Jack Ketchum on the set of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Man, this movie totally got under my skin. I've been waking up at night thinking about it. It was so tense, so well made, so well acted and written and directed. It is a masterpiece. I absolutely loved Barbarian, and I want to see more horror movies this good. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look back at 32 horror movies I watched in October. That was a busy month. I guess thanks to COVID, I had lots of time to just sit on the couch and watch movies this month. So, all right, guys. Well, take it easy. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.